Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Ben and I'm a self-taught web developer who went from zero to paid full stack in 8 months via the Odin project. And in today's video, I'm going to be doing a recap on my most popular video, and that is this one right here. So it's called the Odin project, job offer accepted. I was so happy when I recorded this video, but the quality, the audio, the video is absolutely terrible. So I just wanted to remake this so that people have something that's a bit more visually and audially, if that's a word, pleasing to watch and listen to. So I'm just basically going to reiterate what I went over in this video, and that is my journey to getting my first job offer from the Odin project. So it all started in December of 2021. That's when I started the Odin project. But I really started to take it seriously in January of 2022. I remember January 4th, 2022 is the first day I ever wrote a lick of a coding language, and that was JavaScript in the Odin project foundations. For some reason, that date's etched in my memory, and it's a big one. And then I just grinded hard for the next 8 months until I got a job. So I went through, I wasn't working from March onwards in that year. So I was working full-time January, February, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to commit to this. And I stopped working in March of that year. I took paternity leave, and it afforded me the ability to focus 100% on studying at the Odin project. So I ground through, I think I finished JavaScript in the foundations by around February, and then I started doing the Ruby path. And I didn't do all the courses in the Ruby path. I do have a video on this, but I went through the Ruby path. Skipped a couple of the last projects just because I was in a bit of a rush. And I started the Rails around, I think it was May or late April of 2022. My goal was really to get into Ruby on Rails. And then at the end of the Ruby on Rails path, you're faced with doing a project, and the Odin project recommendation is to build like a Facebook clone. However, I wanted to build something real. I wanted to build something that actually had tangible benefit and value in the world, and something I could show to people that is, hey, I built this and it actually has real users, look. And that was on the recommendation and advice from my good friend who's a Ruby on Rails developer and was self-taught, but had been in the industry for about 8 years at that time. He said, build something real. So I know that around June of 2022, while I was working on the Rails component, I started applying for other jobs, and I recall sending about 50 resumes out. Now, granted, June 2022 was before the massive layoffs. The industry was still, it was in a different place than it is today. Resumes were getting people into interviews. People were hiring. Debt was cheap. And we hadn't hit that massive wall that came in late 2022 and 2023. So I sent out 50 resumes and I got about 8 interviews or next steps. And that transpired to 2 interviews with one company that was out of the States. It was a medical startup. And the other was a Canadian company based in Toronto. And these were both for Ruby on Rails. The medical company in the States, I did an initial interview with them, and then I got to a technical piece where they wanted me to, it was like to iterate through some nested data structure and pull out certain values. It was a great recursion problem, but I didn't use recursion for it. In retrospect, I should have. But yeah, I reviewed the code with them in a third meeting. And they said, oh, you mean you're doing really well for someone who's only been studying for 6 months, but this is not quite the level that we want. And I was so gutted at that point because it was my first interview, and I'm like, this is it. I've made it. I've got an interview with a San Francisco startup, and it was it was a bit of a letdown. But in retrospect, let's be real, it makes sense that I didn't get the job. And then the second interview that I had with a Canadian company, this was my hardest interview I've ever had in any job that I've ever had, and that's because I just froze. And it was a technical assessment. So there was an initial interview with HR, got past that. Then there was a technical assessment where you had to solve some pretty simple LeetCode style problems, and I was on the call with 3 other developers, and I just froze. My mind went blank. It was the first time I had ever had to code live in front of anybody else, and the imposter syndrome just smacked me across the face, and I felt like I shouldn't be here. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a fraud, all this, and my mind just went blank. So it was tough, and they kind of like gave me time, and they were understanding, and I managed to solve the problems, but I didn't give a very good showing there whatsoever. So that's behind me now. And, I wasn't, and this is a really good point here, is I say, the question is, should I start applying for jobs? Well, I say, send your resume out and the market will tell you whether or not you're ready. And at this point, the market told me that I wasn't ready yet. And that's great because I had that feedback. I'd interviewed with a couple companies, I'd done some technical tests, and they were saying no thanks, but no thanks. So that told me, okay, I need to knuckle down and continue my studies. So that's why I took 3 months and I built this Ruby on Rails dog pet adoption application for the outfit where I got my dog from. And that for me was it's kind of my flagship project. It was something I'm still very proud of. Even though it was very simple, it's still running today and it's brought me so much more value, which I have explained in other videos with open source, etc. like that. But anyway, I built this from June and I launched it. I recall it was around in September. But I continued sending out applications, and one of them was to Shopify. I actually caught the tail end of their internship window, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for this. And this was really early in the Rails path. I only just understood what CRUD was. I'd only built the basics of a web application in Rails. And they gave me a technical test for this, and this was just to build a very simple CRUD app using Rails, which I did. Thankfully, I'd just done enough in the Rails path to be able to do that. Then there was a follow-up interview with HR, which is kind of like a fit interview, and that went very well. But then things started to kind of go south because the communication was really good to a point, and then they started to not respond very quickly and were being a little bit cryptic in their messaging. And I was booked for a technical interview with Shopify, and I think it was a couple days before the interview, despite me sending a couple emails to my recruiter, I got notified that Shopify was withdrawing their entire internship program. And this is when things and rumbling started to happen in the tech industry with layoffs, right? This was the first sign of it. So there were other people who had offers and they were rescinded. So they must have been gutted. And I was a bit gutted for having it pulled back from me. But what I did is I went onto LinkedIn and there were some comments and articles about Shopify going through layoffs, cutting interns. And I just made a comment on one of those saying, yeah, it happened to me. I was one of the people. And a journalist reached out to me saying, hey, I'd love to interview you to kind of get your sense and how you felt with all that. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. I did an interview with a journalist, which was kind of weird. And my comment kind of went viral. It got picked up and I made a whole load of new connections and it had a whole load of likes. And one of the connections I'd made was a girl in the States who's studying web development. And we were chatting back and forth over LinkedIn, just saying, yeah, getting your first job's really hard. What are you studying? How are you doing? A couple of days later, she tagged me on a post for FreshBooks. And FreshBooks was saying, hey, we saw what Shopify did. If anyone wants to come and work with us in our internship program, send your resume over. So that's what I did. And she tagged me on that post, and I never would have known about it unless I was interactive on network and engaging with people. So I think a learning from that is definitely leverage your networks and LinkedIn if that's something you want to do. It will certainly up your chances. So I sent them my resume, and then I had an interview with them. And it was a very sort of informal interview with the engineering manager. She didn't ask me anything. There was no technical assessments, but a lot of questions about my approach to coding, the projects that I'd worked on, how I problem solve, how I fix problems, how I work with others, whether I'm open to feedback, things like this. And I had so much to talk about because at this time I was building my pet adoption application. So this interview was, I think it was late July. And so I was like right in the thick of working on my pet adoption application in Ruby on Rails. And I hadn't finished Ruby on Rails path at that point technically, but that interview went very well. And I'm a firm believer that pet rescue project is what kind of made my interviewer see, okay, this person's really dedicated, really wants to grow, really wants to learn. And she awarded me the position, and I got an offer a couple of days later, and I was so happy. And this was August of 2022, and I started that job in September of 2022. But I was on cloud 9 for a while there, and I came and made this video that I showed you at the beginning, just outlining my path to that point. And it was a great experience at FreshBooks. The offer was for an internship. It was for 4 months. It was $70,000 Canadian, which for an internship salary back then was pretty solid. And I stayed on at FreshBooks for from September through to December, and then they rehired me again on another contract from January to April. And then I decided to leave FreshBooks because they'd also gone through layoffs. They were also hit by that, the raising cost of debt and shareholders being unhappy, and CEO makes decisions to fire and lay off people to save costs. And it really brought down the sentiment and the morale and the engagement level at FreshBooks at that time. And I wasn't happy being brought on for another 4 months because there was no assurance in that for me. I didn't know if it would continue on or not. So I actually I went back to my old job just because it was available to me at the end of the paternity leave, and it was more secure and paid a bit more. And I continued looking for other jobs, and that's where I landed 1 month later my job as a Ruby on Rails developer, where I was getting paid way more than I would at FreshBooks. So that the risk that I took paid off, but it was a risk in this environment where finding jobs is difficult. But yeah, I mean that sums up my story of going through the Odin project and getting my first job. And when you first start doing interviews, don't be hard on yourself. That's what I took away from all this. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be brand new to you. Coding in front of other people can be very tough, but you will get better at it. Practice it, and you will get better. I'd say lastly, the one point I want to make here is the industry is a little bit different now. So I'm not sure what it's like trying to get in as a fresh junior right now, but I understand it's very competitive, very challenging. And that's why you need to have a project that makes you stand out. And I think you must build a flagship project, if you can, with real users, because that's going to separate you from the rest of the people. And that's what matters. That's what will get you in that interview. Okay, that's the summary. It's a little shorter than the other video. Hopefully the audio and visual is much better as well. But that's it. That's it. The rest is history. And I'm continuing in my career and very happy I made the switch. Okay, see you in the next one.